We are Lost Broadcast, and tonight, we don't let the signal go quiet. Stay close, keep the lights on if you need to, and whatever you do, don't dismiss what you're about to hear. What started as a routine solo hike quickly turned into something that the person who lived through it still cannot fully explain, even years after it happened. This account was originally shared on an outdoor recreation forum, posted under a throwaway username by someone who identified themselves only as a woman in her mid-30s from the Pacific Northwest. She had been hiking for most of her adult life. She knew trails the way some people know the back roads of their hometown, by feel, by instinct, by the particular way the light hits the trees at a certain time of day. What happened to her on a Wednesday afternoon in late October is the kind of true scary story that gets under your skin, not because it's impossible, but because it's entirely, horribly possible. Her name, for the purposes of this narration, was Mara. Mara had done the Crestline Trail before. She had done it in summer, when the undergrowth was thick and green, and the air smelled like pine resin and warm dirt. She had done it in early spring, when the path was muddy and the birds were just starting to come back. She had never done it in October, and she told herself that was the whole point: to see the fall colors, to experience the trail in a new season, to feel that particular kind of peaceful solitude that only comes from being deep in the woods with no one else around. She parked at the main trailhead around 1:30 in the afternoon. The lot was empty, except for a single truck she didn't recognize, an old model, dark green, with a cracked rear windshield and no visible license plate on the back. She noted it the way you note anything slightly out of place, with a vague awareness that faded quickly, the way minor things do when you're excited about something. The first mile and a half of Crestline is gentle. It slopes upward slowly, through a corridor of Douglas firs so tall they make you feel small in a way that most people find comforting rather than threatening. The light filters down in long, pale columns. Your footsteps sound soft and muffled against the needle-covered ground. It's the kind of place that makes you exhale. Mara exhaled. She walked. She took photographs of the red and orange leaves that had begun to fall from the deciduous trees further up the trail. She ate half a granola bar and listened to the absolute silence of the forest. No wind that day, no birdsong, just the occasional distant crack of something settling in the canopy above her. She was about 2 miles in when she first noticed the signs. Not official trailhead signs, something else. Someone had tied strips of orange surveyor's tape to branches along the left side of the trail, at irregular intervals. This wasn't unusual in itself. Hikers and trail crews used flagging tape all the time to mark detours or hazards. But these didn't form any pattern she recognized. They weren't marking a side trail. They weren't clustered around a washed-out section or a downed tree. They just appeared, every 30 or 40 feet. Bright orange strips, knotted loosely around branches at roughly eye level, fluttering slightly, even though there was no wind. She took a photo of one. She wasn't sure why. She kept walking. The trail began to steepen around the 2.5-mile mark, winding up toward a ridge where, on clear days, you could see 3 different mountain peaks. The orange flagging tape continued alongside the trail, and then, somewhere around the 3-mile mark, it stopped. Instead, there was a piece of paper. It had been folded and tucked into a split in a birch tree at the side of the trail, as though someone had placed it there intentionally, knowing it would be found. Mara stopped. She stood very still for a moment, looking at the paper, listening to the silence around her. Then she reached out and unfolded it. It was a hand-drawn map. Not a good one. The lines were shaky, as though they'd been drawn quickly or under duress. She could make out what looked like the trail she was on, and a dotted line that deviated from it, leading off to the right, up a slope, toward what appeared to be a structure of some kind. A square, a building, maybe, or a shelter. At the bottom of the map, in capital letters, someone had written 3 words: "Do not enter." That was it. No explanation, no name, no date, just the map the structure, and the warning. Mara folded the paper back up and put it in her pack. She told herself it was nothing. A joke, maybe. Kids. Someone who had too much free time and a weird sense of humor. She kept walking. But she found herself glancing to the right more often as she climbed, looking through the trees. The slope to the right of the trail was thick with undergrowth, ferns and devil's club and young alders crowded together. But every now and then there was a gap, a place where the vegetation thinned out. And through those gaps, she began to see something. A roofline. She stopped walking. She stood on the trail and looked through the gap in the trees, and she could see it clearly. A building. Low and dark, set back from the trail by maybe 100 yards, half buried in the hillside. The roof was corrugated metal, mostly rusted. The walls were rough-hewn planks, gray with age. There were no windows that she could see from this angle. Or if there were windows, they were shuttered or boarded. The building wasn't on any map she had ever seen for this trail system. She thought about the handwritten map. She thought about the words at the bottom of it. Then she looked at her watch and calculated the time. She had about 2 hours of good light left, which was more than enough to get back to the trailhead before dark if she turned around now. She turned around. She was 20 steps back down the trail when she heard it. A sound from the direction of the building. Not a loud sound, not dramatic. It was the sound of a door opening. The specific, unmistakable sound of a wooden door dragging across an uneven threshold. The sound of swollen wood against a rotting frame. Then, silence. Mara did not look back. This is the part of her account she is most clear about. She made a conscious, deliberate decision not to look back. She walked faster, not quite running, but walking the way you walk when every muscle in your body is telling you to run, and your brain is still pretending everything is fine. She got about a quarter mile down the trail before she heard footsteps. They were behind her, on the trail, not in the undergrowth, not moving through the brush, on the trail itself, moving at the same pace she was, keeping a consistent distance. She counted them. Left, right, left, right. A person, walking. She sped up. The footsteps sped up. She slowed down. The footsteps slowed down. At this point, Mara told herself, in the account she later shared, that she made the worst decision you can make in this kind of situation. She stopped. She turned around. The trail behind her was empty. 30 feet of visible trail, a gentle curve, trees on both sides. Nothing. Nobody. No movement, no rustling branches, no sound at all. Not even the footsteps fading away, which is what you'd expect if someone had just stepped off the path. They hadn't faded. They had simply stopped at the same moment she had. She stood there for a long moment. Her heartbeat was very loud in her own ears. The silence around her felt different now. Not the comfortable silence from before, but the kind of silence that has weight to it. The kind that makes you aware, at a deep and animal level, that you are very far from help. She turned back around and walked, fast, all the way down. She was almost at the first mile marker, almost back in the gentle, familiar lower section of the trail, when she saw the man. He was standing just off the path, about 10 feet into the trees, and he wasn't trying to hide. He was just standing there, watching her. He was wearing dark clothing, a dark jacket, dark pants, and he was completely still. She could see his face well enough to know that he was looking directly at her, but not well enough to make out his expression. He didn't move as she approached. He didn't move as she passed. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, in the trees, watching, as she walked by at what she was very consciously trying to keep as a normal pace, trying not to run, trying not to show fear. She hit the trailhead parking lot at a near sprint. The dark green truck was still there, but now it had been pulled forward, repositioned so that it was angled toward the exit road, with the engine already running. She could see exhaust rising from the tailpipe. Someone was in the driver's seat. She couldn't see their face, couldn't tell anything about them, but they were watching her. They were watching her get in her car. She drove out of the lot as fast as she safely could, and she didn't stop until she was back on the highway. When she got home and emptied her pack, she found that the folded map was gone. She had put it in the outer pocket, the one with a zipper. The zipper was closed. The map was not there. She reported the encounter to the county sheriff's department. A deputy took her statement. They told her the building she described didn't match anything in their records for that area, and that the trail was on public land managed by the Forest Service. They did drive out and check the parking lot. The dark green truck was gone. There were no fresh tire tracks in the soft gravel at the trailhead entrance that matched a vehicle that had recently exited. As far as anyone could officially determine, nobody had been there. Mara has never gone back to Crestline Trail. She drives past the turnoff sometimes, on the way to other places. She always looks at the tree line as she passes. She has never been able to fully explain what she saw and heard that day. She is not the kind of person who believes in ghosts or monsters. She is the kind of person who believes in patterns. And the patterns she witnessed that day, the tape, the map, the building, the footsteps, the man in the trees, the waiting truck, had the unmiss of something deliberate. Someone wanted her to know she had been seen.
And someone made sure she never found out why.
Sometimes a new sound appears, one that doesn't belong, one that your brain cannot file away and ignore. And once you start paying attention to it, you can't stop. And sometimes, when you follow that sound to its source, what you find is something that you spend years afterwards wishing you hadn't. This account was shared on an urban living subreddit, then later expanded in a series of posts by a man who identified himself as a graduate student living alone in a mid-sized city in the American Midwest. He had lived in the building for about 8 months before the events he describes. His account covers a period of roughly 3 weeks. For this story, we'll call him Daniel. Daniel's building was a 6-floor walk-up built sometime in the 1940s. Not a nice building, but not a bad one. Solid brick, thick walls, high ceilings, the kind of construction that doesn't exist anymore. His apartment was on the 4th floor, at the end of a long hallway, number 4B. The apartment across from his, 4C, had been empty since he moved in. He knew it was empty because he had never heard anyone in it. In a building with walls as thin as those, you heard everything. He could hear the couple in 4A arguing on Thursday evenings, regularly, about money or the dishes or something that faded into indistinct murmuring through the plaster. He could hear the old man above him in 5B watching television until 2 in the morning, game shows mostly, or old westerns. He could hear on quiet nights the people on the floor below him having dinner. But from 4C, directly across the 6-foot hallway from his own front door, he had heard nothing. In 8 months, not a single sound. He had assumed it was vacant. He had stopped assuming that on a Tuesday night in November. It was after midnight. He was still awake, finishing a paper, when he heard a door close somewhere on his floor. Not loudly, not a slam, just a quiet, firm click, the sound of a latch catching. His own door was closed. The couple in 4A had gone quiet hours ago. He sat at his desk and listened, telling himself he had imagined it. Then he heard footsteps in the hallway. Not the heavy footsteps of someone going to or from the elevator. These were different, slow, deliberate, and short, as if someone were pacing, back and forth. Maybe 6 steps in one direction, then 6 steps back. He went to his peephole and looked out. The hallway was empty, but through the fisheye lens he could see, or thought he could see, the faint movement of air beneath the door of 4C, the kind of movement that happens when someone is standing just behind a door. He stood at the peephole for a long time. The hallway stayed empty. The footsteps had stopped. He went back to bed and didn't sleep well. Over the next week, it happened 3 more times, always late, always the same pattern: a door closing, footsteps pacing, then silence. The first 2 times, the hallway was empty when he checked. The third time, he opened his own door and stepped out into the hallway. The door to 4C was slightly ajar. He could see a thin vertical line of darkness through the gap. He could smell something, not strongly, but distinctly, something chemical. Formaldehyde came to mind, though he couldn't say why. He stood in the hallway for a moment, one hand on his own door frame, and stared at the gap in the door across from him. Then something pushed the door slightly more open from the inside. Not a lot, maybe another inch. But deliberate. Deliberate, as if something on the other side had pressed against the door and then pulled back. Daniel went back inside his apartment. He locked his door. He shoved a dining chair under the handle. The next morning, he went to the building superintendent and asked about apartment 4C. The superintendent, a tired, heavy-set man named Victor, who had managed the building for 15 years, looked at him for a long, flat moment and said, "That apartment is unoccupied." Daniel said he knew that, but that he had heard sounds coming from it. Victor said, "Buildings make sounds." He said the HVAC system ran through the walls on the 4th floor and sometimes made the doors rattle. He said this with the practiced neutrality of someone who has given this explanation before and has decided to keep giving it, regardless of what the response is. Daniel pushed. He asked if he could see inside the apartment. Victor said he'd take a look. He never did. The following Thursday, Daniel was woken at 2 a.m. by a sound that was not footsteps and was not a door. It was a voice, low, coming from across the hall, through the wall, as though someone was talking quietly but steadily, not pausing for a response, not having a conversation, just talking. A monologue. He pressed his ear against the wall and couldn't make out words. The rhythm was wrong. It wasn't the rhythm of normal speech. It was slower, and each sentence, if that's what they were, seemed to end at the same point, as though whoever was speaking was repeating the same thing over and over. He recorded it. On his phone, pressed against the wall, he recorded 4 minutes of that low, steady murmuring. When he listened back in daylight, it was quieter than he expected, but clearly there. He posted the recording with his original thread. Several people in the comments listened and offered theories. One person said it sounded like a television. Another said it sounded like someone reciting something from memory, a script or a prayer or a list. Daniel said it didn't sound like a television to him because there was no variation. No background noise, no music, no volume changes. Just a voice, even and low, repeating the same passage of sound in the same rhythm. He started sleeping with the light on. In the 3rd week, the sounds escalated. He came home on a Saturday afternoon to find a smell in the hallway stronger than before. The same chemical smell, but heavier now, and underneath it, something else, something organic and wrong, that he described in his post as the way a refrigerator smells when the power's been out for 3 days. He stood in the hallway with his keys in his hand and looked at the door of 4C. The gap was still there. The door was still slightly open. He took out his phone and used the flashlight. He shone it through the gap. He could see a narrow slice of the apartment, bare floor, a wall, the lower corner of a window with the blind pulled down. He could see a power cord running along the baseboard, plugged into a wall outlet. The cord disappeared into the darkness beyond his line of sight. Something was plugged in an empty apartment that had supposedly been vacant for at least 8 months. Something was drawing power. He called the police this time, not the building super. He called the non-emergency line and explained the situation. An officer came. Together, they knocked on the door of 4C, got no response, and then the officer and Daniel went and found Victor and asked him to open the apartment. Victor's hands were shaking when he unlocked the door. The apartment was almost empty. Bare walls, bare floors, the blinds drawn on every window. The smell was much stronger inside, that formaldehyde, and something else, something rotten. In the center of the main room, there was a folding table. On the table, there was a laptop computer, an old one, thick and heavy, and it was running. The screen was on, showing a blank white document with a cursor blinking in the top left corner. The spacebar had been pressed down and held in place with a piece of tape, causing the cursor to advance continuously across the blankness of the document, one space at a time. Someone had programmed the laptop to sit there and type nothing endlessly into an empty document. In the kitchen, in the cabinet under the sink, the officer found a sleeping bag, a water bottle, and a stack of granola bar wrappers. Someone had been living in the apartment, not as a tenant, hiding. Sleeping there in the cabinet space under the kitchen sink, leaving to eat and use the bathroom and return. For how long was impossible to say. There were photographs on the wall of the bedroom, taped up, printed on regular paper, black and white. They were photographs of the building, of the hallway, of the door to apartment 4B. Some of them were taken from an angle and a height that suggested a camera positioned on the floor or very close to the ground, near a threshold. Daniel moved out within the week. He stayed with a friend while he found a new apartment. The police investigation found evidence that someone had been entering and exiting the building through a basement window with a faulty latch. Victor, the superintendent, was questioned at length. He maintained that he had no knowledge of anyone being in the apartment. A person of interest was identified, but never charged. The photographs on the wall of the bedroom were of apartment 4B. They were of Daniel's door. He has never been able to explain why he was chosen or what whoever was in that apartment ultimately intended. He knows only that for several weeks, while he slept and studied and moved through the ordinary routines of his ordinary life, someone was on the other side of the wall, watching, waiting, timing the sound of his footsteps, learning the shape of his days. He left the city after he finished his degree and has never returned. He still sleeps with the light on. This is one of those true horror stories that circulates in certain corners of the internet and refuses to be forgotten, not because it involves anything supernatural or impossible, but because it involves something that is entirely, quietly real, something that could be found anywhere, something that suggests a human capacity for darkness that is more disturbing, in many ways, than any monster. The story was originally shared by a man named, for our purposes, Cole, who posted a detailed account on a True Scary Stories thread about 2 years after the events it describes. He wrote carefully and at length because, as he explained in the post, he had spent 2 years trying to figure out the right way to talk about what he and his 3 friends experienced, and he had finally decided that the only right way was to be as specific and as honest as possible. What follows is based on his account. Cole was 26 at the time. His 3 friends were the same age, give or take, people he had known since college, the kind of friendships built on years of shared history, inside jokes, and the particular comfort of people who have seen you at your worst and kept showing up anyway. There was Marcus, who was the one who suggested the trip. There was Priya, who did the driving because she was the most reliable about it. And there was Nate, who brought the camera, a decent digital camera he had borrowed from his sister and intended to use for the landscape photography he had taken up and then mostly abandoned over the previous year. They were heading to a state forest 3 hours from the city, with plans to camp for 2 nights and spend the days hiking. It was early June. The weather was supposed to be perfect. They had done trips like this before, though not recently. Life had gotten complicated in the way life does in your mid-20s, and this was their first real trip together in almost 2 years.
They were all looking forward to it the way you look forward to something when you've been missing it without quite naming what it is you're missing. The drive out was easy. They stopped for coffee and bad gas station sandwiches and talked the way old friends talk. Nothing important, everything comfortable. The slow unwinding of city tension. It was Priya who first noticed that the GPS had stopped updating somewhere around the 2.5-hour mark.
The roads out here were a mix of state routes and county roads, some of them so small they didn't appear on satellite maps, and the GPS had developed the habit of recalculating constantly. This was normal and annoying, and they mostly ignored it. The turn Marcus suggested was not on the GPS. It was a dirt road, partially screened by a line of willows, with a rusted gate pushed back on one side. The gate looked like it had been open for a long time. Grass had grown up around the post. There was no sign, no markings, nothing to indicate what the road led to.
"That looks like a shortcut," Marcus said. Priya said it didn't look like a shortcut. It looked like a private road. Marcus said there was no sign saying private. There was no sign saying anything. They took the turn. In his account, Cole says this with a flatness that communicates something. Not regret exactly, but a kind of heavy awareness. They took the turn. That's how it starts. Not with a sinister decision, but with a small, casual one. Someone says it looks like a shortcut. Someone else doesn't argue hard enough. You take the turn.
The road went straight for about 1/4 mile through a stand of old growth, big trees, older than any of them, their canopy pressing together overhead so that the light came through fractured and green and shifting. Then it curved. And then, around the curve, they saw the house. It was a farmhouse. 2 stories, white ones, now mostly gray and peeling. A covered porch along the front, sagging on the right side where a post had partially collapsed. A barn set back to the left, its doors hanging open, the darkness inside absolute.
An overgrown garden to the right of the house, visible through the weeds, the shapes of raised beds, the rusted skeleton of a cold frame. Someone had put care into this property once. That care had stopped, abruptly, and nature had moved back in. Abandoned, Marcus said. Nate already had the camera out. Cole said they should keep driving, find the main road. Priya agreed with Cole. They were outvoted by the energy in the car, the collective interest, the pull of the thing, the way an unexpected discovery makes you feel like you've been given a gift. They parked, and they got out. The front porch steps were soft under their feet, but held. The front door was unlocked, not open, but unlocked, swinging inward when Priya pushed on it lightly. They stood in the doorway and looked into the front hall of the house. Everything was still there. This is the detail that Cole returns to most often in his account. The fact that the house was not empty. It had not been cleared out or looted. In the front hall, there was a coat rack with coats on it. In the living room beyond, there was furniture, a couch, 2 armchairs, a coffee table with a stack of magazines on it. The magazines were water-damaged, curled and brown at the edges, but they were there. There was a television, an older model, on a stand against the wall. There were photographs on the walls, family photographs, framed, showing people at different ages and different settings. A family. A mother and father, and from what they could see, at least 2 children. This place looks like people just left, Priya said. Cole agreed. The phrase he uses in his account is that it felt like a held breath, as though the house was waiting for someone to exhale. Nate was photographing everything. Marcus had gone ahead into the kitchen. The kitchen, too, was intact. Dishes in the rack beside the sink, dry and dusty. A calendar on the wall. Cole looked at the calendar. It was open to a month and year that he declined to specify in his account,
except to say it was more than a decade before the day they were standing there. The day circled in red marker, the 14th, had a single word written in the circle. Leave. Just that. Just leave. In red marker, on a day more than a decade in the past.
They began to feel, collectively, and without quite articulating it, that they should not be in this house. The feeling didn't arrive all at once. It crept in around the edges of things. The way the light was wrong. It was a sunny day outside, and the house was gloomy in a way that seemed more than just dirty windows. The way it smelled, dust, and something underneath the dust, something sweet and wrong. The way their own voices seemed too loud, as though they were disturbing something that preferred quiet. Marcus found the basement door. Cole, in his account, says this was the moment.
Not the circled calendar page, not the smell, not the feeling of wrongness. The moment was when Marcus opened the basement door and the smell came up from below, and all four of them stepped back simultaneously, involuntarily, as though their bodies had made a collective decision before their minds had caught up. The smell from below was not ambiguous. It was decay. It was something organic, something dead, something that had been dead long enough to have passed through all the visible stages of death and arrived at something else, something drier and staler, but no less undeniable.
Nobody went down the stairs. Cole called 911 from the front porch. He gave their location as best he could. The state forest, off the county road, a dirt track through old growth, white farmhouse. The dispatcher was calm and professional and said a unit would be sent out. They were asked to wait outside and not to re-enter the property. They waited by the car. The deputy who arrived, about 40 minutes later, went into the house alone. He was inside for a long time. When he came out, his face was composed in that particular way that trained responders compose their faces, not quite blank, but sealed. He asked them again for the exact sequence of events, everything they had touched, how they had found the road. He radioed for backup. 2 more units arrived within the hour. Cole and his friends were asked to give formal statements at the sheriff's department. They did. They were told that the investigation was ongoing and that they would be contacted if needed. They were not given any information about what the deputy had found in the basement. Cole searched for news reports over the following weeks. He found one, a brief item in the regional paper, no details, noting only that remains had been discovered during the investigation of a rural property and that the case had been referred to the State Bureau of Investigation. Remains, plural. No follow-up story was ever published, as far as Cole could find. No charges were ever filed, as far as Cole was able to determine through public court records. The case, as far as any public record shows, resolved into silence. He has never been able to determine who lived in that house, or what happened to them, or when, or why that day in the calendar was circled with the single instruction to leave. He has never been able to determine why nobody appeared to have listened. The photographs on the walls of the living room showed a family, a complete family, mother, father, children, in ordinary settings, birthday parties, holidays, a vacation somewhere with mountains in the background. A Christmas morning, children in pajamas surrounded by wrapping paper, parents standing behind them with the tired happiness of parents on Christmas morning. Cole has thought about those photographs for 2 years. He thinks about the family in them. He thinks about the calendar. He thinks about what it means that the house was full of coats and dishes and family photographs and magazines, and that nobody came back for any of it. He thinks about the word circled in red. Leave. Someone wrote that word and circled it, and maybe they intended it as a plan, a reminder, a date fixed in time. Maybe they were warning themselves. Maybe they were warning someone else. Maybe they never got the chance to follow through on whatever that word was supposed to mean. The road they came in on had no name. Cole drove back along it a year later, alone, on a different kind of day, overcast, the trees just starting to turn. He found the willow screen, found the spot where the rusted gate should have been, but the gate was gone.
The road had been blocked, not with new fencing, just with large stones, unmovable, set deliberately across the track. The grass had grown back over the ruts of the dirt road. Someone had closed that entrance. Someone had made it invisible again. Cole drove on without stopping. He said in the final lines of his account that this is what stays with him most. Not what they found, but how efficiently and quietly it was all made to disappear afterward. No news, no answers, no acknowledgement. Just silence, pressing in around the edges of everything that happened, the way silence does when someone powerful wants to keep it. He still doesn't know what was in that basement. He has made peace with not knowing. He has not made peace with not knowing why. 3 stories tonight. 3 accounts from people who went somewhere ordinary, a trail, an apartment building, a rural road, and found something they were never meant to find. 3 experiences that left marks, not just in memory, but in the fundamental way these people moved through the world afterward, with more care, more attention to the small details, more awareness that the things we can't explain don't require our disbelief to be real. These are the stories that don't make headlines. They live in forum threads and late-night posts and the quiet conversations between people who have learned to trust what they felt, even when they can't prove what they saw. They are the stories that feel like true horror, not because they defy reality, but because they sit so entirely within it. If you've had an experience like any of these, something unexplained, something that felt wrong in that particular and unmistakable way, something that you've carried with you because no one seemed to want to hear it, we want you to know that you're not alone in carrying it. Thank you for being here with us tonight at Lost Broadcast. If these real horror stories found something in you, if they sat with you the way true scary stories do, then you already know why this channel exists. We are here for the signal that doesn't go quiet. We are here for the accounts that get filed away and forgotten. We are here for the people who need somewhere to put what they can't put anywhere else. Subscribe to Lost Broadcast if you haven't already. More true horror stories, more creepy encounters, more unexplained events, more disturbing stories from the edges of ordinary life. They are coming. We release new stories regularly, and every one of them comes from the same place tonight's stories did. From real people, real experiences, and the very real human instinct that tells you, before your brain has had time to process anything, that something is wrong. Trust that instinct. Stay safe. Stay aware. And we'll see you in the dark. Lost Broadcast, where the signal never dies.